Action of Japan versus South Africa, where South Africa have gone through to the semi-finals. The score finished 3-26, but that does not tell the story of the game really, because this was a game of two halves.
Oh gosh. Let the cliches ride again.
Clong, yep, drop that cliche.
No, I don't think so.
You don't think it was a game of two halves?
No, I think what was begun in the first half was finished in the second. And if you have a look on Twitter, on Paul's feed there, you'll see the halftime discussion that we had. And I asked Paul, can we do one? Because I was feeling frustrated with the commentary that we were getting in New Zealand. And I called it at halftime.
You did? So that first half, what did we see? Well, we saw basically Japan hold onto the ball really well, go through the phases, starve South Africa the ball, but basically run into a green wall that whole time. So we saw, one of the things we talked about, or needs to be written about and talked about all pre-game this one, was going to be, could Japan cope with the physicality that the South African forwards would bring? And they basically, and they didn't, effectively, is what happened. Sometimes they made the gain line, sometimes they didn't. But what really mattered was, in that collision itself, they were falling backwards rather than falling forwards. So there were lots of dominant tackles at the moment, which is the sort of the common or the favourite term du jour for them.
Well, you know, it was more than a brick wall, green wall. They were running into a green steamroller. So we expressed this after the Scotland game, that they play a beautiful brand of rugby, but they are able against Scotland, and they did it against Ireland as well, that if they didn't breach the advantage line when they made contact, they at least were stopped there, but they weren't driven back. And after the Scotland game, remember in our discussion, I said my concern for them is that when they make contact, they're going to be driven back. And this is what happened. In the first half, we were listening to commentators who were saying, oh, the South Africans are sucking the big ones and they're moving them around and they're moving the ball. And I'm watching a game where actually the Japanese don't look like scoring. And if you think about the proof of the pudding is in the eating, they scored 3 points, and those 3 points were when South Africa was down to 14 men.
Something that was rather ironic, considering what else happened in the game, from a scrum penalty.
Right.
As well,
From a scrum penalty. Yes. Where they were scrumming against 7.
They were scrumming against 7, yes.
Yes.
One of the areas that South Africa totally dominated Japan in was the set piece, right? So that first half, they only had 32% possession, 30% territory. So half the territory in possession that Japan had. But when we were looking at the number of clean breaks, they both made the same amount of clean breaks. The meters run were relatively similar. The South Africa was slightly less, but South Africa had made.
But South Africa had 2/3 of what they did, with what, a quarter of the amount of carries.
Yep.
Right. So what was happening, and this is what I was seeing, is that tons of ball being smashed, looking tired, and every time South Africa had the ball, they would cross the advantage line and just drive them back for every carry. And so here we're getting this narrative which was being perpetrated, at least with our country, which was wishful thinking, right? Whereas I'm looking at it and I'm seeing exhausted Japanese forwards. I'm seeing Japanese players sucking the big ones. I'm seeing them being hit behind the advantage line. I'm seeing them starting to increasingly look gun shy when they're carrying the ball. I'm seeing every time South Africans, half the carries, but every time they take it into contact, they're just driving through the contact. And all of that, I think they've got to rev up, the South Africans, because they could have been more accurate, and the backs butchered 2 tries, at least 2 clear tries, opportunities from bad handling, and possibly a third, right?
Yep.
So we're talking 12 to 21 points, somewhere in that region, right? And they came out in the second half, and they just then executed even better.
We should talk about the try that did happen. Off a scrum, South Africa spot that
The weak defender.
The weak defender. Japan are hiding the number 10, their fly half on the wing.
And they unleash Mapimpi.
They unleash Mapimpi, and boy, he knows how to score.
Mapimpi now, I think his strike rate is something, I think he's got 12 or 14 tests, and he's at a New Zealand winger's strike rate of almost a try per test, right? And if you consider the athlete that he's keeping out of the Springbok team, which is Spoo Nkosi, who scored one of the tries of the individual tries of the year against Argentina, you can see why, because he scores. And he has some deficiencies on defense, and they're working on that with him. But his ability to finish, and the way that he just shrugged off Matsushima in the second half, sheer speed. This is the thing. They unleashed him, and he was through. And a couple of times in this game, he treated Matsushima, who is much heralded wing, he treated him like a speed bump. So he not only has speed, but he has power as well. And basically the South Africans it wasn't pretty. It wasn't, I don't think, particularly good for the game. And I'm a Springbok supporter. I love them.
Well, we'll get to the unpretty bit in a second. But some of the good players from that first half. Faf de Klerk, wonderful tracking of the scrum half off a scrum, getting the intercept.
Yes, great reading of the opposition play.
Lukanya Am.
Although he butchered the try by not passing quick enough and just putting it through the hands properly.
Razi used bully tactics on Japan tonight. That's very right.
Absolutely right.
But Lukanya Am, great reads, great tackles, defensively solid. Delendi, again, butchered try, defensively very strong, and also very strong at the ruck. I mean, practically a fourth loose forward.
Absolutely.
At the ruck. Shame he can't pass.
Lukanya Am as well. Yeah. Yes. Also another loose forward. Yeah. And Delendi is. Oh, jeez. Anyway.
Anyway, yep. And that was really kind of the first half. The other point, the last thing we should talk about, the first half, there was a yellow card for the Beast. You say we talked about this at half time, but yeah, dominant tackle by him, probably more dominant than he was expecting. Lifted the
more
player
dominant
up.
than the Japanese player was expecting as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they both weren't expecting for him to have that kind of impact. Yeah.
And then tip tackle, and the player got driven into the ground. Player puts his arm out so that he doesn't make contact with, that doesn't land on his head or neck. If he hadn't done that, it could have landed head and neck, and it could have been
a red.
Wayne Barnes dealt with it straight away. Maybe should have gone to the TMO and reviewed, but he dealt with it very quickly. And part of him picking up on it quickly stopped any flare up at that point. And so I think it should be, for controlling the players, I think he did really well. Captain Show says, what a game. Not the prettiest game.
Look, it was a hell of a physical contest, right?
Yes.
And we've probably seen the greatest DrivingMaul try at international level ever, because that line-out started inside the Springbok half. Barely, but inside the Springbok half, and finished with a try next to the poles. So there is a level of mauling there that's unbelievable. There's also a level of naivete there. I mean, the All Blacks would have dropped that maul before they allowed a try.
And if you drop that maul at around about the 10 metre into your own half, when you already know, but it's already gone over 10 metres, you're not going to get carded for that. And it's not going to be a penalty try because it's way too far out. And that's where it should have been dropped. But to show you how much the Box used the maul and knew it was effective, 10 line-outs by the Springboks had, they won them all. 10 mauls, they won them all, i.e. the ball came back out, it didn't get trapped in there. Every single line-out in this game, the Springboks mauled. You'll very rarely see anything like that.
Yes, but I think here's the important thing, and again, here is you see the head backline players in the commentary. That's the problem. No brains, right? That what was happening is they were softening them up in the first half.
Yep.
And so that maul, when they started mauling inside in that one that led to a try, now, they didn't expect to score.
That maul happened in the 65th minute.
Yes.
Okay.
So they softened them up.
They spent an hour
mauling them.
softening them up, mauling them, and also
so-
at scrum times,
Yes,
deliberately.
wearing them out.
Yeah.
So those mauls earlier on were, inside their own half, they were mauling. What they actually do was they were grinding down the opposition. Now, for those of you who don't know South African rugby pre-2000, it might surprise you to know that prior to South Africa returning into international rugby, South Africa was the most winningest team in the world, even more than the All Blacks. And especially since professionalism, All Blacks have just disappeared into the distance with their excellence. But South Africa was the most successful team in the world, right? And the traditional South African way was subdue and penetrate. You smash the opposition for 60 minutes, and then you unleash what was very good backs, right? Now, when I say what was very good backs, there was some terrible backline play, not on defense, but handling-wise.
Tonight is what you mean,
Tonight.
yeah.
I'm talking about tonight. Terrible handling. And but the idea would have been the traditional South African way was that you soften up the opposition and then you unleash the backs and they finish them off, right? And they used to be fast and skillful handlers, right? And strong.
But whereas what we saw here was that first half where, South Africa just didn't have the ball, let's be honest.
And they were not bothered.
And they weren't bothered, yeah.
They weren't bothered. And you get, again, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to harp on the commentary, but it does make me feel like we are sometimes not well served by the service that we pay for, in that what was unfolding was a very particular plan. They didn't do it as well as Rossi wanted them to, but there was something that you could look at and you could see that this Japanese team was being worn down before your eyes, even if they had the ball, and they didn't look like scoring.
No, and then come the second half, the plan was they got a rev up at half time, so they came out.
The Springboks, at least.
The Springboks, came out much more accurate.
They were more accurate at what.
And then for the next sort of 10, 20 minutes, what the Springboks were doing was get the ball at maximum 2 phases before it was kicked.
Yes, 2 phases.
2 phases kicked. Challenge
unless
it,
they were inside the 22.
and then look for basically if make a challenge so it's definitely going to get knocked on by somebody. And they didn't really care who, because that meant you're going to have a scrum, and then at the scrum they would get a penalty and they'd take a shot at sticks.
You see, they were so confident that even if they challenged on that kick and knocked it on themselves, and it was a Japanese scrum, they were confident that they could scrum the Japanese off the ball or get a penalty, and they just kept it. So that's how dominant they were, that they didn't care if the scrum was on the Japanese 22, but a Japanese put in.
Yep.
They were confident that they had probably 50-50 chance of getting a penalty there.
And that's how they went on to rack up the score. So 43 minutes scrum penalty, 48 minutes scrum penalty, 57 minutes scrum penalty, but missed kick.
By the way, sorry, Captain Cho, I agree with you 100%. Wonderful way that they played.
Yeah. So what the actual comment was, for those of you who haven't seen it, was that because the source Michael Scott's podcast is that he's very impressed with how Japan have played.
Yes,
this
beautiful way of playing. Beautiful way of playing. Sorry, I interrupted you there. I just wanted to agree with that.
And that basically took the score from being 3-5 up to 3-11, and basically a 2-score game.
Yes.
By doing that, and then there was a high tackle penalty on the 62nd minute. But that 20 minutes was basically kick, force a scrum, get a penalty, kick for sticks. Not pretty, but damned effective.
Yeah. Now, there are resemblances here in philosophy and thinking to how the All Blacks played the semi-final against South Africa in 2015, right? Is that in that first half, you think the game is close, right? It's not, because Japan don't look like scoring, and they're playing pretty patterns and doing everything, and they say, oh, they're handling or whatever, and I'm watching, and they're not getting to the advantage line, and rarely getting to the advantage line, and they get to the advantage line, and then they get smashed, right? If not, they're getting caught behind the advantage, and it's happening again and again and again, and in the same way, what the scoreline flattered the Springboks hugely by the end of that semi-final, but actually the whole time the All Blacks had them under control. It was like a little a brother being held at arm's length by the bigger brother, and you got the sense that if the little brother did anything, the bigger brother was able to handle it, right? And so
And that, especially in the second half.
and then you saw the consequence of that first half playing out in the second half. They were finished, and they tried to change a whole lot of their playmakers. They took the first 5 off because he was being so manhandled. They took their number 8 off because he was being manhandled. They changed their very effective loose head prop. They brought that blonde highlighted replacement prop who was so dynamic when he came on against Ireland and Scotland, and the Springboks broke him.
He had to go back off again and got replaced.
He was carrying himself like this, and then the one he replaced had to come back on again, right? So yeah, it was a huge physical beat up.
And during that time, we also had Peter Toy clear, would have scored, but LaRue gave him a forward pass. So another disallowed try. And that's butchered try. Sorry, that's like 3 or 4 butchered tries by that point. We're talking somewhere between 20 and 28 points that the South Africans left out on the pitch there through butchered try opportunities. This should have been just like
40 plus.
It should have been a 40 plus game, just like the England game was, just like the New Zealand game was.
But by the way, the very impressive thing is this Japanese team that's racked up points against Ireland and Scotland was kept to 3.
Yep.
And was kept to 3. And that 3 was only scored when they had a one-man advantage.
Yep.
Right? So the defense, especially out wide, which is where some of the naivete of Mapimpi has been shown up before, there's been a lot of work on that. Right? And the spot-up tackles and the effectiveness of those tackles and the follow-up, if there's somebody's beaten with stepping, the next follow-up tackle, there's been a tremendous amount of work on that. Clearly.
Faf is always an excitable player, so yes, I know you're saying you want him to calm down, but that's just not his style.
I mean, he was under instruction.
He was under instruction to kick.
That was a very clear game plan. That was the way that they had been directed to play. Now, that doesn't mean that they should play that way against the All Blacks. I think if they played that same game plan against the All Blacks, which they have employed, they are more likely to lose, right? Because the All Blacks are skilled enough to diffuse it. All Blacks can stand up to the Springboks in the forwards, and I believe the Springboks need to play with their back line and attack. And I believe they have the wings that can actually cause major problems.
The problem is, do they have the centres to get the ball to those wings?
Personally, I would love to see Francois Steyn start, right? Because Francois Steyn has a beautiful pass and tremendous skills, and is hugely physical. He's even bigger than De Lende, right? But that doesn't seem to be. But I think that's what's needed to beat. I don't think that's necessarily needed to beat Wales, but I think it's what's needed to beat the All Blacks.
Right. So I mentioned New Zealand versus England. Well, this isn't a conversation. This isn't a video about that. We'll talk about that at another stage. But having just watched the Wales-France game and the Springbok-Japan game, obviously we have got Wales versus Springboks next weekend. The Springboks cannot, or Wales will not do the same thing as Japan has done in this game. Okay, Wales will put up a lot of kicks, a lot of bombs, and a lot of contestable kicks, and we could end up with a real two-side. And it's
only thing keeping me awake is my allegiance.
This is his reference to his own team.
The Boks leading them.
Don't worry. But this is what we could end up with: is two sides basically kicking at each other, waiting for the other to make mistakes, and then kicking points from those. And I'm not expecting the most dynamic game between Wales and South Africa next weekend. It's going to be tense. It's going to be physical. It's going to be a right battle. But I'm not expecting a dynamic game.
And here's the thing: although I said they need to play out wide or attack to beat the All Blacks, funnily enough, they've got even bigger dominance over the Welsh wingers than they do of the All Black wingers, right? And I think that if they manage to put Mapimpi and Colby in space, or at least one-on-one with the Welsh wingers, they're going to make yards. And with enough, close enough to the Welsh line, they're going to score.
Well, against George North, yes, right. He has been not the other winger. I want to say Helen Amos, but it's not. It's someone else.
Yeah.
He's been much better, to be fair.
Much better.
But against George North, there's definitely opportunities.
But remember, Mapimpi has got a try rate of almost a try per game, and he plays in the He plays in the Rugby Championship. He plays against Australia, New Zealand, and Argentina, right? And he is world class, and Cheslin Colby is
Yep.
amazing, right? So he's right up there with the best wingers of this tournament, right?
But the only time they got released those guys was actually when Pollard made the break and Pollard gave them the ball.
Yes.
To LaRue and then LaRue. So we're talking about the 10 and the 15 giving the ball to the wing.
Yes.
They kept it away from
Correct.
12 and 13.
Yes.
Those two, Delendi and Mapim and Am had fantastic defensive games.
Yeah.
Attacking, unfortunately, not so much.
Who impressed you for the Japanese?
There
There we go. That's an answer.
that's the problem. Is that they didn't have.
They were just physically dominated and smashed. You know.
They were. What they needed to do, and they did it occasionally, but not very often, was they had to play with lots of depth, get it round that defence and out wide. Something we talked about that Ireland needed to do and didn't show them doing it at all against the All Blacks. Now Japan did it a few times and occasionally got some joy out of it.
I got one occasion where was it Matsushima, who was opposite Colby?
I think it was Matsushima. Yep.
No, it wasn't. Matsushima was opposite Mapimpi. Matsushima's the right wing. It was the other wing, Fukuoka. Be careful how you say that. He stood Colby up and then took off and skinned him on the outside, which is very difficult to do because they'd got it out too quickly. But here's the issue, is that the plan they had to get to the outside was predicated on the speed of wings that they faced in Scotland and Ireland. And the top end acceleration that those South African wings have, they hadn't come up against yet, right? They needed a different game plan, and they needed to be able to pull that, to cause some doubt in that South African team. So they needed actually to do some tactical kicking into the holes behind the South Africans and hold that defense up. But they were so committed to that tactic.
Mm-hmm. And hence we see that both the Japanese wingers had 12 runs with the ball, which is more than anybody else on either side. So they got more runs. Both made about 50 metres. So we're talking about 5 metres a run.
You're talking about 4 metres. I mean, think about 4 meters, right? Which is, by the time they get the ball, which is way behind the advantage line, they make 4 meters on the carry.
Yep.
Right?
It's not enough. There was some fantastic tackling in this game. Looking at the comments there. Mapimpi had a good game. We've mentioned him already. Colby had a quiet game.
Very good on defence.
Very good on defence.
Some incredible... I mean, even a defensive line-out that was not a defensive, attacking line-out for Japan, 5 meters out for the South African line. South Africa taps it back, they turn it over, and he cleans it up. So there was lots of clean-up, chasing, hitting rucks, a lot of like dirty work that he was doing. Excellent on defense.
11 tackles as a winger.
Yes, no, he was not being selected for the Springboks because the idea was too small. 11 tackles for winger is outstanding.
He had a big game. Yeah, he had a very quiet game. So it wasn't very.
Let's put it this way. He had a quiet game on attack.
He didn't have a visible game then, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. But he had an amazing game on defense.
Yep.
Amazing. And as did that whole back line. Even Willie LaRue put in one massive hit that we saw, you know. And don't underestimate the impact of Andre Pollard in that first channel out. Nobody enjoys running into that channel because he is very dominant as a tackler.
Which is why he only had to make 5 tackles.
Yes, because they don't want to run in that, you know. He's not Butch James so far as avoid at all costs. But he certainly is a very dominant tackler, and they
But that's
don't want to
because
run
Butch
it.
James would take your head off.
Nah, it was
He was-
overplayed. I saw Ma Nonu make far more no arms tackles than Butch James, right?
Okay.
And Butch James will tell you the same.
Colby was very good on the high ball as well. Very
Yes.
true.
Yes, he is an extraordinary rugby player.
Right then, so that's basically it.
Who impressed you besides that in the South African forwards? Sorry, I'm jumping all over you.
in the South African forwards?
Yeah. Kolisi was huge.
Yep. Peter Steph-Toy
Yeah.
had moments.
Peter Steph-Toy, now hear me out now. Peter Steph-Toy deserves to be nominated for World Rugby Player of the Year already, right? Peter Steph-Toy plays for the full 80. He's over 2 meters tall. He is sometimes the chaser for kicks and making the first tackle. And at the 80th minute, in that turnaround where the Springboks won, let me give you an example. He played the full 80 in Pretoria, and 6 days later, because of the 11-hour difference, he played the full 80 in Wellington, right? And in the 80th minute, the 79th minute, he's the one who puts pressure on Aaron Smith, who, because he's chasing Aaron Smith doesn't see Colby coming from the other side, and South Africa gets the try. His engine is unrelenting for a 2.01, he's like 202 meter tall guy, and he's been successfully moved from lock to blindside flank. And this is going to be heresy for New Zealanders listening, but if you were to choose, if you had the choice between Savia and Peter Steph-Toy, it's not a simple thing.
No. Luke Jaeger, 15 tackles, none missed.
Again, this is why they brought him in ahead of Franco Mostert,
Yep.
who's an incredibly tireless worker, but his sheer physical impact
But
is
also,
massive.
Frank is known as a line-out person. And I guess one of the things we should also talk about here is actually the forwards work at the line-out. They stole 4 line-outs, or one. Japan just won 8 out of. They stole 5 line-outs.
5 liner.
They
And they
stole
disrupted other lineouts too.
Yep, they stole more than 1 in 3 line-outs, which is just nuts. So yeah, it's a massive effort there. And also massive effort at the scrum. I think as a unit they worked really well today. I think that's the main thing.
That is, and if you think that Malcolm Marx, who a year ago was hands down the best hooker in the world, he has dropped off in form. I don't know why. I haven't heard any inclination of injuries or, if there's something going on that has affected his focus or something. But if you think that he's now second choice, it shows you how far Bongi and Bonambi has come, and he was very impressive today in Bonambi. The throwing in the lineouts. Remember, before they came into this game,
And he didn't even last the first half. So going to be a bit worried about his hamstring.
about his hamstring.
This week.
It was a hamstring or a calf, but it looked like a hamstring. The thing, though, is to remember that prior to this game, having played 3 matches, including against the All Blacks, a full test against the All Blacks, the Springboks came into this game with a 100% record in their lineouts. And they were 100% today.
Yep.
Right? So competing on their own throw against, no, they didn't. Let's be fair. Retallick wasn't in that match. Right?
Yep.
It was Barrett and Whitelock. So their lineout is looking very strong. Their scrum, I think, is the best scrum in the competition because of the 2 sets of front rows that they bring on. It's not just simply the first starting front 3. It's the second starting 3.
We're assuming that the beast doesn't get sighted.
Yes. If the beast doesn't get sighted. It certainly would have been the case without question if Nyakane was still around. So they're looking formidable in the set piece. And, who made a tremendous impact, even though he was brought on late, because the game, I think they wanted to give Kolisi a lot of game time for fitness reasons. Once the game was so secure, he's been out for months and months. So this is, I think, his 4th game back, right? But Francois Lowe, you could see the massive impact that he has when he comes on, right? Multiple turnovers, winning at the breakdown, huge impact. So this may be the gnarliest, nastiest pack.
And
in
this
the
is
tournament.
why I didn't understand South Africans' tactics. Right. So in South Africa, it was 2 phases max kick. What I would have been doing is ball out to a pot of 3 forwards, smash it up. Ball out to another pot of 3 forwards, smash it up, and just keep that going over and over and over again, and just trash the and charge over.
Well, maybe
So
they
to
thought.
me,
Maybe they thought.
I think
Maybe
they
they
could've-
would. They thought Japan would be expecting that, right?
And with six replacement forwards on the bench, I think you could have done that. Brought on the other 6 at 50 minutes and just kept it going. So I think they could have been more dominant. I think they could have got that dominance earlier if they'd taken that tactic. But they didn't.
So I'm going to ask you a question now, right? The remaining 4. If we take off our white English underpants in your case, and my green and gold ones in my case,
His is a thong. Anyway, go on.
I told you not to talk about it on this channel.
Go on. Anyway, so yes, once we've taken our national allegiances away,
Remember
what's the question?
Remember what we say
What's the
off
question?
camera. Okay. The 4 that's left, for the sake of the game, what is best for the game when it comes to winning this World Cup?
There's an argument for saying that actually Wales winning it's best for the game, as they never have done before. We get a new winner. It's not the same over and over again. From a style of play point of view, you've got to say, I mean, the All Blacks have the nicest game to watch, as we saw with the sort of number of tries they racked up against Ireland. So those were the 2 that you want to see win it, I think.
I differ with you.
Okay.
I think that stylistically, England, ironically, between England, Wales, and South Africa, England play the least boring of the 3 of them, right? Which is ironic because England traditionally were the most boring of all. But all 3 of them play horrible rugby, right? England is just the least horrible of the 3.
It's
Right?
not that horrible.
No, it's, oh gosh.
Now,
They look, and I'm South African. It's horrible rugby. Okay, from the point of view of what's best for the game, if Wales were to win, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's just they don't attack. They just defend and kick goals. Right. Anyway, let me finish my turn.
Mine wasn't about stylistic.
No, but I'm saying the best for the game. There's 2 options for me. One is the All Blacks, because the way that they play is a game based in skill. It's a game based in moving into space, speed and skill, and moving into space without sacrificing the fundamentals of the set piece, right? Which is where Japan were found out. They didn't have a strong set piece, right? They could cope with Scotland and Ireland. They couldn't cope with the strength of the Springboks. So they can hold the Springboks at least. Maybe they don't dominate the Springboks, but they don't get driven backwards.
Yep.
And then so it's honoring the fundamentals of the game whilst playing. So that's one. And the only other one that could rival that would be if a black African captain lifted the World Cup. If you don't have Japan as a team from the East winning, opening a whole new world up to the game, the impact in the African continent, not just on South Africa, but on the whole continent, which is the 2nd largest continent in the world, right? And is full of very potentially strong rugby players. Just look at Nigerian-born England player who's Maro
Toji's English
Maro.
born.
Yes, English. Sorry. You're 100% English born, but from Nigerian parents, right?
Yep.
So I'm talking about the genetic abilities within the African continent. For a black African captain to lift that would be massive for rugby across the whole continent, right? As an inspiration. But that's the only one that I can look at and I think good for the game.
From a Northern Hemisphere point of view, or from a European point of view, I think having the another Southern Hemisphere win. If New Zealand do it 3 on a trot, it's just getting a bit. But hence, that's why I think that actually having Wales win it, who never have won it before, would actually be a good thing. Look, no, this is you're coming at it from a Southern Hemisphere point of view.
No, I'm not. I'm just going from a perspective of, at the moment, as much as I love the Springboks and I want them to win, at the moment, it's the All Blacks are here.
But your experience,
and then there's daylight, and then there's all the other teams.
So I'm saying your experience is from a Southern Hemisphere point. That's where your experience comes from.
No,
right?
no, I'm watching the game and I'm seeing a game that's being played that is to be applauded. And the closest that I've seen to that is Japan and Scotland playing that way.
No, but I'm not talking about the skills here. I'm talking about the actual. I'm talking about the who is winning. Okay, I think that actually having Wales winning it, having someone from the Northern Hemisphere will be a good thing for the game. I know you think it's a bad thing because of their style, but I think from the fact that they've not won it before,
I think it'll be terrible for Wales.
and
I love Welsh people, right? I love their passion for the game, right? But I think it would be like taking the game back into the Stone Age if you think that's the way to play rugby in order to win.
but I'm not about stylistically. Yeah, I'm saying I just think
You don't need to grow the game in Wales.
a variety. No, but it's not just Wales.
It's not going to thrill somebody in Holland or Germany to play rugby because Wales won.
But it is going to thrill the Six Nations supporters, the fact that we've got another winner up there, that it's not just always the Southern Hemisphere winning.
You mean the Six Nations who control rugby and make all such great decisions, right?
No, they don't just control rugby. They have a very big say, but so do the Southern
The most
Nations.
dominant. Oh, there we go.
And as much as you're trying to say that France got the Rugby World Cup last time instead of South Africa, the reason they got it was because actually the Tier 2 nations voted for them, not the most of the. If you actually get your facts. Anyway, never mind that. Thank you very much, folks. Good night. It's late here. I'm going to bed.